They called them Banditos. Imagine facing down Nazi Germany, only to be dismissed by the enemy before you even fired a shot. Ever wonder how sheer prejudice could blind an enemy to the threat right in front of them, leading to their own downfall? History remembers the big battles, but sometimes forgets the soldiers who fought with double the burden, facing the enemy and facing disrespect from those who should have known better. They called them Banditos. Imagine that for a moment. You've crossed an ocean, left your home, your family, everything familiar on a small island in the Caribbean. You've put on the uniform of the United States Army, sworn an oath, trained relentlessly for the grim business of war. You're heading into the crucible, facing one of the most ruthless military machines the world has ever known, Nazi Germany. And then you learn, maybe through captured documents, maybe through prisoner interrogations, maybe just through the grapevine of war, that the enemy high command, the very people orchestrating the fight against you, considers you a bandit, not a soldier, not even a worthy adversary, but something akin to a common criminal, disorganized, undisciplined, inherently inferior. It's an insult that cuts deeper than any propaganda slogan. It's a fundamental denial of your training, your discipline, your very identity as a soldier. How could this happen? How could seasoned German officers, meticulous planners, known for their military professionalism, look at the men of the U.S. Army's 65th Infantry Regiment, soldiers from Puerto Rico, and cling to such a ludicrous, demeaning stereotype? It wasn't based on battlefield reports, not initially. It stemmed from something uglier, something deeply rooted in the warped ideology that fueled the entire Nazi war effort: racial prejudice. They looked at maps, saw where these soldiers came from, saw their Hispanic heritage, and immediately slapped on a label born of ignorance and arrogance. They expected chaos, not courage. They anticipated disorder, not discipline. But history delights in irony, doesn't it? Because that very dismissal, that contemptuous underestimation blinded them to the reality heading their way. Those men, those American soldiers from Puerto Rico, the ones they mocked as banditos, were about to carve their legacy onto the battlefields of Europe, a legacy written in blood, sweat, and undeniable bravery. The cost of the Nazis' prejudice wouldn't just be embarrassment, it would be measured in lost battles and defeated objectives. We today need to understand this story, not just to honor those soldiers, but to grasp the dangerous folly of judging any group of people based on preconceived notions. Their fight deserves to be remembered, their honor defended, their story told. Now, think about it. This feeling of being sized up and found wanting before you've even had a chance to prove yourself, it's not confined to the battlefields of World War II, is it? Many of us in different walks of life, maybe in our younger days, in our careers, even within our own communities, have felt that sting. Being labeled, being put in a box, being told implicitly or explicitly that you're not expected to measure up. It's a universal frustration, a deep-seated human need to be seen for who you are, for what you can do. These soldiers face that fundamental challenge under the most extreme circumstances imaginable, under fire, in a foreign land, fighting an enemy who literally saw them as less than human based on where they came from. That's why their story isn't just a dusty page in a history book. It's a living example of resilience, of the power of the human spirit to rise above prejudice and prove the doubters, the haters, spectacularly wrong. So let's dig deeper. Why were the Nazis so profoundly mistaken? The foundation, as we've touched on, was their toxic racial ideology. The Nazi worldview was built on a perverse hierarchy of races, with the so-called Aryan race at the pinnacle and everyone else relegated to lower rungs. Slavs, Jews, Roma, black people, and yes, Hispanics were all considered untermenschen, subhuman, inherently lacking the qualities the Nazis prized: discipline, order, martial prowess. This wasn't just casual bigotry. It was state-sponsored dogma drilled into their soldiers and society. When they looked at Puerto Rico, a Spanish-speaking island territory of the U.S. with a mixed-race population, it fit perfectly into their prejudiced framework. They likely envisioned soldiers who were lazy, undisciplined, perhaps prone to panic, easily routed in a real fight. They couldn't conceive of these men as embodying the discipline and technical skill required of a modern infantryman in the United States Army.
What makes this even more layered is the reality within the United States at the time. Let's be honest, America in the 1940s was far from a paradise of equality. Segregation was law in many states. Discrimination against Hispanic Americans, African Americans, Asian Americans, and others was widespread, even institutionalized. While the men of the 65th wore the same uniform as soldiers from Kansas or New York, they often faced a different reality. They might encounter prejudice from fellow soldiers, unequal treatment, barriers to promotion. There was often a sense that they had to work harder, fight smarter, be better, just to be considered equal. So, when they shipped out to Europe, they weren't just carrying the fight against Hitler, they were carrying the hopes and pride of their island, and the heavy burden of proving their worth not only to the enemy, but sometimes, sadly, to their own allies as well. This wasn't merely about winning battles, it was about earning respect, inch by hard-fought inch. Many veterans from different backgrounds from that era have spoken about this, the feeling of fighting a war on two fronts. If you served or knew someone who did and encountered anything like this, sharing that perspective even briefly helps younger generations understand the complexities these men faced. It adds a crucial dimension to their story. While the soldiers dealt with these realities, the German propaganda ministry was busy painting its own distorted pictures. Joseph Goebbels and his machine were experts at caricature and stereotype. They portrayed American GIs often as naive, clumsy, or materialistic cowboys, lacking the supposed innate warrior spirit of the German soldier. When it came to Hispanic soldiers, it's easy to imagine them dusting off old racist tropes, the lazy peasant, the fiery but ultimately ineffective bandit. It fit their narrative. It reinforced the idea of German superiority. It was certainly easier for them to believe this than to acknowledge the truth that the United States, despite its internal flaws, was assembling a vast, diverse army, drawing strength from all its people, including those from its territories. Propaganda, however, has a notoriously short lifespan when it collides with bullets and bayonets. The comfortable stereotypes peddled in Berlin were about to be shredded by the harsh realities encountered by German soldiers in the foxholes and shattered towns of Italy and France. The men they were trained to dismiss were disciplined, well-equipped, and fighting with a determination fueled by patriotism and a deep sense of honor. Crucially, the 65th Infantry Regiment wasn't some hastily assembled green unit thrown into the fray. They had a proud history stretching back nearly half a century. The regiment was officially constituted in the regular army in 1908, evolving from volunteer units formed in Puerto Rico right after the U.S. gained control of the island following the Spanish-American War in 1898. They had served garrison duty, participated in maneuvers, and built a tradition of military service on the island. By World War II, this wasn't just a collection of recruits. It was an established regiment with its own NCO corps, its own institutional memory, its own sense of identity. They underwent the same demanding training regimens as any other U.S. infantry unit heading overseas. Think about what that involved in the early 1940s. Endless drills in marksmanship, squad tactics, maneuvering under fire, bayonet practice, learning to operate machine guns, mortars, anti-tank weapons. They spent time training in the challenging jungle environment of Panama, which honed their skills in difficult terrain and close-quarters combat, skills that would prove surprisingly relevant in the mountains and forests of Europe. Then came further training stateside, specifically gearing them for the European theater. They were prepared for what lay ahead. The notion propagated by the Nazis that these men were somehow inherently less capable, less disciplined, less suited for modern warfare was not just offensive, it was demonstrably false, a fantasy born of racial arrogance. So, when the 65th deployed, first arriving in North Africa in early 1943 for further training and garrison duty, and then entering the fight in Italy later that year, and subsequently landing in southern France in 1944, they were a known entity within the Allied command structure. General Patton himself had inspected the regiment in North Africa and reportedly praised their discipline and appearance. While the Germans might have clung to their Bandito caricature, Allied commanders saw U.S. soldiers ready for deployment. They were assigned to various corps and armies, given objectives critical to the overall campaign. The stage was set for a dramatic confrontation between Nazi prejudice and the fighting spirit of the Puerto Rican soldier. What happens when deep-seated underestimation meets determined resistance? The answer, as the 65th would prove, is often written in unexpected victories and costly lessons for the arrogant. Their journey through the battlefields of Europe became a rolling refutation of the racist label the enemy had tried to pin on them.
Let's put ourselves in the muddy boots of those soldiers during the Italian campaign. Starting in late 1943 and through 1944, Italy was a meat grinder. After the initial landings, the Allied advance crawled northward against incredibly determined German resistance. Think towering mountains like the Apennines, narrow valleys, rivers, and ancient towns perched on hilltops, all turned into fortresses by the Germans. Field Marshal Kesselring, the German commander in Italy, was a master of defense. He used the terrain brilliantly, constructing multiple defensive lines, the Gustav Line, the Gothic Line, studded with bunkers, minefields, and machine gun nests. Every advance was paid for in blood. The weather was often miserable: rain, mud, snow in the winter. This is the environment the 65th was thrown into. They weren't facing demoralized conscripts. They were up against some of the Wehrmacht's toughest, most experienced units, including mountain troops and paratroopers who knew how to use the terrain to their advantage. And what did the Banditos do? They fought. They took their objectives. Assigned to the U.S. Fifth Army, they engaged in relentless patrolling, often probing enemy lines in treacherous conditions, gathering intelligence, and engaging in sharp, brutal firefights. They participated in assaults on heavily defended German positions, requiring careful coordination, covering fire, and sheer guts to cross open ground swept by machine guns and mortars. They learned to dig in quickly, hold captured ground against fierce German counterattacks, often involving tanks and artillery barrages. Did they sometimes struggle? Of course, every unit did. The learning curve in combat is steep and unforgiving. But the record shows they adapted, they endured, and they fought effectively. Reports from commanders and observations from adjacent units began to paint a picture not of bandits, but of determined infantrymen. The initial skepticism some might have held within Allied ranks began to fade as the 65th proved their worth under fire. One can only imagine the conversations in German field headquarters. Perhaps an initial report mentions encountering Puerto Rican bandits, easily brushed aside. But then reports of stiff resistance, of failed German counterattacks, of positions lost to determined assaults by these same troops. Did some German officers start to revise their opinions? Did the soldiers on the front line, the Lancers facing the 65th across no man's land, begin to see not stereotypes, but disciplined opponents? It's likely. Combat has a way of stripping away comfortable illusions. However, the pervasive nature of Nazi ideology meant that officially acknowledging the fighting prowess of a group deemed inferior was almost impossible. It would undermine the entire rotten edifice of their racial theories.
So while the frontline soldier might learn respect through the harsh teacher of combat, the high command and the propaganda outlets likely continued to push the old, false narrative. But for the soldiers of the 65th, there might have been a grim satisfaction, a powerful motivator in knowing they were confounding their enemy's expectations. Every German position taken, every counterattack repulsed, was another nail in the coffin of that insulting bandito label. It wasn't just about winning territory, it was about winning respect, forcing the enemy to acknowledge their error through sheer force of arms.
After the breakout from the Anzio beachhead and the capture of Rome in mid-1944, the Italian campaign continued its grinding northward push, but a new front was opening. Following the massive success of D-Day in Normandy, the Allies launched Operation Dragon in August 1944, the invasion of southern France. The 65th Infantry Regiment was part of this crucial operation, landing on the French Riviera and joining the U.S. 7th Army under General Patch. Their mission? Push north rapidly, link up with the forces coming from Normandy, trap German forces, and drive towards the German border. This phase of the war, the push through France, saw the 65th engage in a different kind of fighting, but no less demanding. They advanced through the Rhone Valley, liberating towns, and then moved eastward towards the formidable Vosges Mountains near the German border. This was late 1944, heading into the brutal winter of 44-45, the same period as the Battle of the Bulge further north. The Germans, now fighting with their backs against the wall, resisted fiercely. The terrain in the Vosges and Alsace was heavily forested, mountainous, cut by rivers, perfect defensive ground, especially in winter. Think of the conditions faced by the GIs: deep snow, bitter cold, trench foot, the constant threat of frostbite, all while battling an enemy determined to defend German soil. The 65th was right in the thick of it. They fought through places like Pericava in the Maritime Alps, clearing strategic passes and facing down stubborn German defenders who used the mountain terrain expertly. They pushed into Alsace, participating in battles to secure towns and communications lines. The fighting was often house to house, a brutal, close-quarters affair requiring immense courage and small unit cohesion. Reports from this period consistently mention the regiment's participation in key actions, holding sections of the front line, conducting offensive operations, and enduring German counterattacks. They were functioning as a standard U.S. Army infantry regiment, performing the same difficult task demanded of units across the European theater. Mountain warfare, especially in winter, requires a special kind of fortitude. It's physically exhausting, climbing steep slopes under heavy gear, digging into frozen ground, enduring exposure to the elements. It's tactically complex, dealing with limited visibility, restricted fields of fire, the constant danger of ambushes from hidden positions. The 65th adapted and persevered. While language barriers could occasionally pose challenges, especially with replacements, the regiment's core effectiveness was undeniable. Bilingual officers and NCOs played a crucial role, bridging gaps and ensuring orders were understood. But beyond language, there was the shared experience of combat, the universal language of survival and duty that bonded these men together. They earned commendations and respect from higher commands for their actions in these campaigns. It's important to remember this context when we hear that dismissive Nazi label. These weren't fleeting skirmishes. This was sustained, high-intensity combat against a determined enemy in some of the war's toughest conditions. If you've ever spent time in the mountains in winter, even just hiking, you have a small inkling of the physical toll. Now add the constant threat of death, the shelling, the firefights. It demanded extraordinary endurance and bravery. Hearing these stories of resilience, maybe it reminds you of challenges you've overcome. If you appreciate learning about how different units contributed to the final victory, maybe give this video a thumbs up. It helps signal that these stories are worth telling and helps others find them.
History isn't just about grand strategies and arrows on maps, it's about individual moments of courage and sacrifice. While official citations provide some details, many stories reside in the memories passed down through families or recorded in unit histories. Imagine a squad from the 65th pinned down by a German MG-42, the infamous Hitler's buzzsaw, spitting tracers from a concealed bunker. The noise is deafening, bullets snapping overhead. A young sergeant, maybe from Ponce or Mayaguez, realizes they have to take it out or they'll be cut to pieces.
He directs his BAR gunner to lay down suppressive fire, then, grabbing grenades, leads a couple of riflemen on a flanking maneuver, crawling through the mud and snow, using shell craters for cover. They get close enough, hurl the grenades, silence the gun, and allow the platoon to advance. That wasn't banditry, that was leadership and cold courage under fire. Or picture a medic, maybe nicknamed Doc, ignoring the artillery shells crashing down around him to reach a wounded comrade lying exposed in a field, patching him up quickly, stabilizing him, then, perhaps with the help of another soldier, dragging him back to safety while bullets kick up dirt around them. That selfless act, repeated countless times by medics across the army, is the antithesis of the cowardice implied by the Nazi slur. These individual acts, multiplied across hundreds of engagements, formed the true reputation of the 65th. It was these actions, this consistent performance of duty under the harshest conditions, that solidified their identity not as outsiders, but as integral parts of the fighting force. And it led to the adoption of that proud nickname, the Borinqueneers. Borinquen, the name the indigenous Taino people called their island. Embracing this name was a powerful statement. It acknowledged their unique heritage while firmly placing it within the context of their American military service. It became a badge of honor, a symbol of their shared identity and collective pride, a name earned in combat, far more meaningful than any label imposed by others, especially the Nazis. This pride was further validated by the medals awarded for extraordinary heroism. Men like Staff Sergeant Alfonso R. Aldama, who earned the Silver Star posthumously for his actions in France, leading his squad in an attack, silencing enemy machine guns before falling. Or Private First Class Louis F. Garcia, another Silver Star recipient for gallantry in action. These weren't isolated incidents. Hundreds of Purple Hearts testified to the wounds suffered. Hundreds of Bronze Stars recognized meritorious service and bravery. Each award was a formal recognition by the U.S. Army of valor and effectiveness, a direct, official contradiction to the dismissive attitude of the Nazis. These weren't just pieces of metal, they were affirmations of courage, bought and paid for on the battlefield. So, let's circle back to that initial question. Why does the Nazi dismissal, the Bandito label, even matter today? It matters profoundly because it starkly illustrates the blinding, self-defeating nature of prejudice, especially in a context as unforgiving as war. When you dehumanize your opponent, when you allow racist ideology to dictate your assessment of their capabilities, you are setting yourself up for failure. You fail to anticipate their strengths, their resolve, their potential for effective action. The German command's adherence to their racial hierarchy, their refusal to see the 65th as capable American soldiers, wasn't just an ugly expression of their worldview, it was a tactical blunder. They likely misallocated resources, planned operations based on faulty assumptions, and paid a price for it on the ground. It's a timeless lesson. Underestimating an opponent based on prejudice is.
As the war in Europe ground to its conclusion in the spring of 1945, the 65th Infantry Regiment found itself advancing into Germany, itself participating in the final destruction of the Nazi regime. They had journeyed far from their island home, fought across mountains and plains, endured winter storms and summer heat, faced down a hateful enemy, and proven their worth beyond any shadow of a doubt. They had fulfilled their mission as American soldiers. They returned home as veterans, bearing the scars of war, but also the pride of having contributed significantly to the Allied victory. But, as mentioned earlier, the fight wasn't entirely over. Puerto Rico's status as a U.S. territory meant its citizens were Americans, subject to the draft, yet often lacking full political representation and facing economic challenges. The respect earned in uniform didn't automatically translate into full equality or opportunity back home or on the mainland. The broader civil rights movement, which would gain momentum in the coming decades, included the fight for Hispanic rights, and the veterans of the 65th often played a role in that continuing struggle, carrying the discipline and leadership skills learned in the Army into their communities. Their wartime experience became a touchstone, a source of collective pride, and a basis for demanding the rights and respect they had fought to defend for others. Looking back from our vantage point, the absurdity of the Nazi label Banditos is glaring.
It's a footnote to their hateful ideology, easily dismissed were it not for the profound disrespect it represented to the men who faced it. It serves today as a potent reminder of the dangers inherent in any ideology that seeks to divide humanity into hierarchies of worth based on race, origin, or any other arbitrary distinction. Such thinking is not only morally reprehensible, but, as the battlefield performance of the 65th demonstrated, it is also practically bankrupt, divorced from reality. The Borinqueneers, through their unwavering service and sacrifice, delivered a powerful, undeniable rebuke to that hatred. Their story is one of patriotism, loyalty both to their island home, Puerto and to the United States. It's a story of professionalism, mastering the difficult craft of infantry warfare. And above all, it's a story of courage, facing down not only enemy fire, but also the insidious poison of prejudice. When we reflect on the sacrifices of World War II, it's crucial that our memory is inclusive. The narrative shouldn't just focus on the beaches of Normandy or the plains of the Midwest. It must include the contributions of units like the Tuskegee Airmen, the 442nd Regimental Combat Team, composed of Japanese Americans, the Native American Code Talkers, and the thousands of Hispanic Americans who served, including the proud Borinqueneers of the 65th Infantry Regiment. Their stories enrich our understanding of the war, reminding us that America's strength, then as now, lies in its ability to draw upon the talents and courage of all its people. Remembering the specific challenge the 65th faced, being underestimated and insulted by the very enemy they were fighting, adds a poignant layer to their service. It highlights that their fight was not just against external tyranny, but also, in a way, for the soul of the ideals they represented. Ideals of equality and dignity that stood in opposition to Nazi fascism.
This legacy didn't end in 1945. The 65th Infantry Regiment went on to serve with incredible distinction in the Korean War, facing brutal combat and again earning widespread respect for their bravery, particularly in holding the line against overwhelming enemy attacks. Their actions in Korea led to the awarding of the Congressional Gold Medal to the regiment in 2014, a long overdue national recognition of their extraordinary service across two major conflicts. That honor reflects a growing understanding and appreciation for the contributions and sacrifices of these Puerto Rican soldiers. Their history continues to inspire. Young men and women from Puerto Rico continue to serve in the U.S. military in large numbers, often citing the legacy of the Borinqueneers as a motivator. It's a tradition of service, of patriotism, woven into the fabric of the island's relationship with the United States. Why does digging into these specific stories matter? Because they are more than just footnotes. They are powerful illustrations of profound truths, that prejudice is a form of blindness, that courage is found in all communities, and that the fight for respect is often as arduous as any military campaign. So when you think of World War II, push beyond the most familiar images. Remember the soldiers who came from a sunny island in the Caribbean to fight in the frozen mountains of Europe. Remember the men the Nazis dismissed as Banditos. Remember the Borinqueneers. Remember their discipline, their sacrifices, their victories. They fought for America, they fought for Puerto Rico, and in doing so, they struck a blow against the hateful ideology they faced, proving on the battlefield the enduring truth that character and courage, not origin or ethnicity, are the true measure of a soldier, and indeed of any human being. Their story is not just Puerto Rican history or military history, it is American history, and it deserves to be honored and remembered by all of us. We've journeyed through a significant, though often overlooked chapter of World War II history today. Understanding the challenges and triumphs of the 65th Infantry Regiment, the Borinqueneers, hopefully adds depth to our appreciation of the sacrifices made by that entire generation. These stories matter, and ensuring they are remembered is important work. If you agree and found this exploration valuable, perhaps consider subscribing to the channel. We aim to continue uncovering and sharing these vital pieces of our collective past. For those interested in more accounts of specific units and their unique contributions during the war, you might find this playlist here particularly interesting. Thank you for your time and attention today. Remembering